Welcome to Bloggers Creating Courses, the podcast which will take you behind the scenes of creating an online course. I'm your host, Verity Songon, founder and education consultant of veritysongon.com. I'm so excited to help you create an online course that you are proud of and to be part of your journey to scale your business as an online course creator. Let's get into the episode. Hiya everyone, and welcome back to this latest podcast episode. And in this episode, I wanted to talk about creating online course lessons without the use of video, which might seem a little bit of an odd concept to some people. There are thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of online courses out there, and in particular, online course lessons where the lessons are only delivered using video. And that's a great way of delivering your courses and delivering your lessons, and video appeals to so many learning styles, particularly visual learners. We know that visual learners make up the vast majority of learners out there, but what if you're not comfortable with making videos, and what if you don't want to teach your students using video lessons? Well, what are the options available to you? And that's what I want to break down in this episode. So without further ado, let's crack on with discussing and chatting about creating an online course without video. And essentially, it's almost like teaching like video, but there's no actual video to see. So your students just listening to your voice, as I said, as they would in a podcast. You've also got your text-only lessons. So this is when your students are reading, similar to how they might read a blog post or an instructional manual, think of WikiHow or what have you. So thinking about those text-only lessons, again, they're a great way for students to learn without you having to create a video. There is a fantastic appeal for text-only lessons and for audio-only lessons, which we'll look into a little bit later in this episode. But the important thing to remember, and the takeaway for this episode, is that video is not the only way to go when creating your lessons for your online course. So why not use videos? Well, there's a whole multitude of reasons as to why people might not want to use videos when it comes to teaching online. First of all, equipment. Not everybody has got the equipment to create an online video or a video to go online. It might be that you don't have a webcam that you feel has got good enough specifications to create an online lesson. You might feel that your microphone isn't good enough to record your voice for video. You might be nervous. That's quite normal to be nervous when recording video. You're concerned about how you look. You're concerned about your background. For some people, it's really difficult to talk to the camera. You might end up looking everywhere but the camera, especially if you've got a screen where you can see yourself. You might end up looking at the screen and almost talking to yourself, which is great. But then when you watch it back, you realise you're not talking to the camera. You're not talking to your student, which can be quite off-putting for your students. You might be worried about showing your background, particularly you think during lockdown, during the COVID-19 pandemic, when there's so many people working from home and producing online content at home. There almost became a competition between people as to who could have the fanciest bookcase behind them or who could have the most aesthetically pleasing backdrop or background. And this got a lot of people quite panicked as to, well, what is my background going to look like for my video lessons, which might inhibit your want to create a video in order to teach on your online course. Finding the time to record and edit video as well. Personally, my experience is that editing a podcast is much easier and much quicker than editing a video. There's probably plenty of people out there who completely disagree with me, but personally I find that finding the time to record and edit a video can be very time consuming, and some people just don't have that time or the leisure of that time to use there. Spending money on software. Some people really panic and are concerned about their budget when it comes to video editing software. Now, as a quick hint and a jump in there, if you are worried about budget, I have created all of my online course lessons which use video to date using QuickTime, and QuickTime comes for free on my MacBook Air. I realise that not everybody has got a MacBook, but if you do have free software within your computer, it's always worth checking that out before you look at software which is paid for. But if you are thinking about using video lessons, then a concern of yours might be about spending money on software, which is completely understandable. You might also feel that some things are just better taught text only. For example, if you've got very specific instructions and you need your students to follow set step-by-step instructions, then providing a text lesson might be better than a video lesson. You've also got to think that text-only lessons, for example, are easier and quicker to update than a video lesson. If you have created a video lesson for your online course and something changes in the topic or the subject field, you've got to potentially re-record that entire lesson to make sure that the subject matter is up to date for your students. However, on the flip side, if you've got a text-only lesson, you just need to go into that text lesson, edit the sentence, the paragraph, or the section that needs updating, which is going to be much quicker and much more user-friendly for you as the content creator than having to redo an entire video. There was an example of this recently. If anybody does the Stupid Simple SEO course, which I would highly recommend if anybody wants to learn SEO, but that's a little bit of a side one there. But in Stupid Simple SEO, one of the products which is used and advocated for students is Ahrefs, and one of the reasons for that is because you can get a trial of Ahrefs for only $7 for a week. However, that has now changed. So whereas the course was very much structured around students paying this $7 for a week-long trial and doing a load of work for researching their SEO within that week, when that trial was removed from Ahrefs, the tutor of Stupid Simple SEO had to restructure the course and reformat some elements of the course to not use Ahrefs and to use a different software instead, which was more cost effective for the students. Now, because all of the video lessons were structured around the use of Ahrefs, that course creator had to do, I don't know how much time they must have had to have put in, but they had to put in an awful lot of time to recreate those videos for that course. Whereas if it had been a text-only lesson, that would have been much easier to just go in and change the paragraphs as necessary. But then on saying that, the Stupid Simple SEO course does lend itself much better to video because there's a lot of follow me now tutorials and looking over the instructor's shoulder. But as I said, that's a little bit of a side tangent. It's much quicker to put together text-only lessons than it is video. You don't need to think about how you're looking. You don't need to think about your camera setup, your lighting. You don't need to be thinking about your background. For a text-only lesson, you just need to sit down and write, essentially. You might be wanting to put some embeds in there, for example, a YouTube embed, and think about things like Creative Commons licensing if you are embedding a YouTube video. But it's much easier to write out those text-only lessons and much quicker as well. Generally speaking as well, the software which you're going to be using to put together your text-only lessons is going to be free or incredibly cheap in comparison to the software that you'll be using to create your video lessons. So for example, you can write out your text-only lessons either straight onto the software which is available on your online platform, on your online course platform. You could be using Google Docs, you could be using Microsoft Word, a whole load of programs out there that you could be using. So when might you want to be using a text-only lesson over a video lesson? Well, in my opinion, text-only lessons work really well when you are writing and structuring how-to tutorials where there are step-by-step instructions which are needed to get your student to an end goal. and also when your student doesn't necessarily need to be shown how to complete a task. So I used the example just a moment ago of stupid simple SEO, and one of the reasons, in my opinion, why stupid simple SEO would not work as a text-only lesson or a series of text-only lessons is because the instructor does a lot of screen sharing where he is taking you through how to use certain programs and achieve certain outcomes by looking at what he's doing at that moment in time on the computer. That's not really going to lend itself very well to a text-only lesson. However, there are other things which would work really well as a text-only lesson. So I wrote a fire marshal course once, and as part of that fire marshal course, there are step-by-step instructions that the students had to follow if they discovered a fire. That particular lesson lent itself really, really well to a text-only lesson because the steps could be written out step by step, really easy to follow for the students to read through, to learn, and then to put into practice as well at the end. So when you are going to be using text lessons, ideally is, as I said, when there are how-tos and there's step-by-step instructions that you want your students to achieve to get to an end goal, and when a student doesn't necessarily have to be shown exactly what to do. They're shown through words and not through visuals. Another good example would be how to write a blog post, for example. Steps can be written with some explanations, and there can be some photos to support what you're saying and what you're writing and to break up the text. But fundamentally, how to write a blog post can be written as a series of steps, which lends itself really, really well to a text-only lesson versus a video lesson. Students can follow those steps, and it's easier for them to go back and repeat those steps if needed, or read over those steps if needed. If you're thinking of creating text-only lessons within your online course, then here are some tips that you might find useful. First of all, use screenshots to break up your text. I use things like UnSplash. I also use screenshots in order to create visuals for my text-only lessons. And if you haven't used UnSplash before, UnSplash have got loads of royalty-free images which are also available for free. And I will put a link in the show notes onto how to get to UnSplash. There are, of course, loads of other platforms which are available when it comes to getting royalty-free images, but UnSplash is just a personal favourite. When you're creating your text-only lessons as well, use plain English. Now, plain English, I will leave a link in the show notes below because it can take a little while to get your head around what plain English is. But essentially, in a very, very tight nutshell, plain English is when you're not using any jargon, any acronyms, nothing which is going to trip up your reader. Plain English is what it is it's what it says on the tin. It's English which can be understood by anybody. So as I said, you're not using technical terms, you're not using jargon that people are not going to be understanding. You're using your capital letters, your full stops at the right places, and you're writing in a way similar to how you'd write your blog posts. You're writing in a way which everybody is going to understand. Break up your text with subheadings as well. I did an online course once, which was a text-only course. The content of it was absolutely fantastic, but my goodness, it was difficult to read and actually get to that content because I was just confronted with walls and walls of text. There were very few subheadings. There were very few images to break up the text. It was like reading an essay at school, to be quite honest with you, which as a student was actually quite off-putting because I wanted to be able to access the information really easily. I wanted to take the information and start putting that information into practice as soon as possible. But instead I found myself wading through these walls and walls of text to actually pick out what I needed. Instead, that course or that particular lesson, those particular lessons could have been structured so much better with some subheadings and probably putting in a few pictures here and there just to break up that text. So think about similar to how you would use your blog post and structure your blog post. You're going to be putting subheadings in, you're going to be using images to break up those walls of text. And that's something you need to be thinking about for your text-only lessons as well. The next thing I would recommend is using boxes in different colours to highlight important pieces of text and important points. So if you've got a particular hint, a particular tip, something that you think would be a sneaky or juicy bit of information for your students to engage with, put it in a different coloured box just to really highlight it, make it punchy. It's going to be something which will not only break up the text, which I've already talked about, but it will also help engage your learner, just in case their mind has started to drift. Another thing you can do is offer a download of the text, which your students can refer back to at a later date. Students love downloads. If they want to engage with your information at a later date, they don't necessarily want to log back into your course and find the information. So a handy download of the summary of the text, or even the text itself, just put structured in a slightly different way, maybe as an ebook, is a great download to be able to offer your students. And if you are offering a download, or you are offering something like a PDF ebook, actually that gives more value to your students. And the more value which is in your content, which you're giving your students, if you're looking at monetizing your online course, people are more likely to pay a premium if they get more value from your content. And having downloads which your students can use after the course, and having an ebook, for example, that your students can use after the course, adds value to your content. So then you can look at charging just a little bit more on the price of your online course. Read your lessons as a student. This is my next tip. Read your lessons as if you're a student. Once you have written them, go back in maybe a week later or a couple of weeks later, or if you're on a bit of a time push or a time crunch to publish your course, even just a day later, but read your lessons back as if you were a student. Go in with a completely fresh mind. Don't reread them as soon as you've written them. You need a break from them. You then need to go back into your text-only lessons and read them as if you were a student. How are you perceiving that information? Is it just a massive wall of text? Does it make sense if you were completely new to this subject? Does it make sense to your intended audience? You need to read through it, read it out loud as well, because reading out loud really helps you pick up on any mistakes, either grammatically or just in your instructions. You start thinking to yourself, actually, that doesn't make sense how I've structured that or how I've written that. If it's not going to make sense to you as the expert writing that lesson, there's no way it's going to make sense to your student who needs to learn that information. So read your lessons as if you're a student and view your lesson as if you're a student. You're looking not just what the information is telling you, but you're looking at the text. Is it a massive wall of text, or have you used enough subheadings and enough images to break up your text and make it engaging for your students, and making it engaging for your students to want to learn something from? We've gone over quite a lot as to why text-only lessons could be something that you might want to explore when you're putting together your next online course, or when you're putting together your next lesson for a particular online course. And there's absolutely no reason why you can't mix up your lessons a little bit within your online course. Just because you've decided video is not for you does not mean that you're not going to include any videos in your lessons. You might want to include one video and then a load of text-only lessons. Text-only lessons mixed with some audio. You might want only text-only lessons. My point is that you don't have to stick with just one approach to your lessons within your online course. You can mix it up as you feel is appropriate for the content that you're delivering your students, and also your intended audience and your intended students there. It's always worth thinking to yourself, how is this going to be received? And it might be that you put together a text-only lesson because you eventually want to put that lesson out as a video, but at this particular moment in time, you don't have the time to be putting that video together. You're on a time crunch. You want to get your online course out as soon as possible. So there's nothing wrong with trialing and putting out the lesson as a text-only lesson, and then you can follow up and replace it with a video at a later point. You might actually even be surprised. You might find from the feedback, students find it really useful having that particular lesson as a text-only lesson, in which case what you could do is actually save yourself the time, leave it as a text-only lesson, or you could end up doing a bit of a hybrid model. And what I mean by that is you provide a video to go alongside the text as well. Again, you think you're giving your students so much more content. You could probably look at upping the price of your course a little bit there as well if you wanted to. What we have looked at in this episode is that videos don't always have to be the be-all and end-all of your online lessons. Text-only lessons work really, really well as well. You don't have to use videos for all of your online lessons and for all of your online content. Experiment with text lessons and see how your students respond to this approach, and also how it fits your teaching style, because sometimes text-only lessons fit some people's teaching style much better than others. If you've kind of had your interest piqued when I've talked about teaching styles there, let me know in the comments, send me a message on Instagram if you would like to have an episode which looks at teaching styles a little bit more, and I'd love to talk more about teaching styles. We've had another jam-packed episode with loads and loads of information here, which I really, really hope you've enjoyed. If you have enjoyed this episode, please, 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 I would love it if you could leave me a comment in whichever podcast platform you are listening to this podcast on. It's great for me to receive the reviews. It helps me figure out what you like and what you don't like about the podcast, and it helps me improve the episodes and what I'm talking about within the episodes for the future. And not only that, leaving a review tells Apple Podcasts or Spotify Podcasts, whichever platform you're listening to this podcast on, it tells the platform that this podcast is worth listening to, and it recommends it to more people, and it helps us improve the reach for the audience of this podcast, which ultimately are people like you. They are bloggers who are looking to create an online course or improve the online course which they are currently offering. So if you could leave me a review, I would be so grateful. Thank you so much for tuning in for this episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'll catch up with you in the next episode, and in the meantime, happy content creating.